All right, so how many of you here have hated your parents at some point in your lives? Well, I certainly have at many points. Why? My most habitual squabble with my parents was surrounding my usage of electronics. For the first 16 and a half years of my life, I didn't have my own smartphone or laptop, while there were 8-year-olds who had their own smartphones, laptops, TVs, and tablets. I started to wonder whether all parents were control freaks, or was it just mine? As I traveled across the world for tournaments, I started looking for answers. I'd come across all sorts of parents. The laid-back ones, the constantly engaging parents, or the helicopter parents. And of course, the crazy tiger moms who'd always be at your back. My parents, on the other hand, didn't exactly fit into any of these categories and seemed to have their own set of strategies up their sleeve. As a 13-year-old, I used to get addicted really easily to Facebook and TV shows. At the outset, my parents simply used to reprimand me. But when you're as stubborn as I am, you'd barely listen. Thanks to that same stubbornness, I paid a heavy price 3 years ago. It was a warm day in 2014. I found myself traveling on a shuttle bus to a World Juniors tournament in Colombia, South America for my match. My mind, however, was thousands of miles away as I found myself furiously texting away with my best friend as I got involved in a heated argument over a trivial issue. As the bus screeched to a halt, I began my warm-up sequence while my dad took me through what strategies I was to follow. As he kept talking and talking and talking, my mind seemed preoccupied with this incomplete conversation with my best friend. What resulted was a sound thrashing in a match I could have won. On the way back to the hotel, we didn't utter a word to each other. The next day, during breakfast, my dad served me an ultimatum. No more texting. I was shocked, angry, devastated, and I hated him for saying that. Although I did start to throw repeated tantrums over this, a faint inner voice agreed with him. As time passed, I slowly started to accept this new reality. It's ironical because the absence of this one object created so much more time for me. And it helped enhance my focus on what mattered to me the most. I started balancing my academics with my squash much better, whether that was becoming the India #1 or getting a 10 on 10 GPA in my 10th grade. No goal felt impossible. Even now, I barely touch my phone. I never even bother touching my phone every time when I go out with my friends because it feels like with every passing day, we're moving more towards a world where we can text endlessly for hours but can't have 2-minute conversations in person. So now, I know it sounds a little bizarre, but with their 8, 9-year-olds who are being gifted the latest iPhone or Samsung for their birthdays. 5 years ago, I'd barely see kids with phones. Today, I barely see kids without. Now, I want you all to ask yourselves 2 questions. If your phone were to buzz now, would you feel this intense urge to go check on it? And have you ever taken your phone with you into the bathroom? If you answered yes to either of these questions, odds are you're highly addicted. We know that the engagement with social media and cell phone usage releases this feel-good neurochemical called dopamine. That's why when you get a text, it feels good. That's why when you're feeling low and depressed, you would send 10 texts to 10 friends saying, hi, 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 because it feels good when you get this response. That's why we count our number of likes on Facebook and closely supervise our number of followers on Instagram. Because when we get these responses, we get hit with that dose of dopamine, and it feels good, and that's why we keep going back to it. Now, this same dopamine is what makes us feel good when we smoke, when we drink, and when we gamble. In other words, it's highly, highly addictive. Now, I'm not trying to undermine what roles phones have had for all of us teenagers, but that fine line separating it being advantageous and it being addicting is where most of us tend to fail. So what do we do from here? Parents. On the pretext of gifting their kids smartphones, they're really just gifting their kids these doses of dopamine highly and frequently. Reality is that most kids under the age of 14 lack the maturity and the restraint to actually be able to have these healthy relationships with their smartphones. Or else, they run the risk of joining these statistics. Lesson 2, the power of role models. As a 13-year-old and an athlete, I knew the importance of having a strong core, as it helped enhance my flexibility, my balance, and my strength. I learned the hard way that it was equally, if not more important, to have a strong emotional core. Till early 2015, I'd have sporadic incidents of bad behavior on court, whether that was throwing rackets after losing a point or arguing with the referee. I was never exactly a model sports person. My dad realized early on that if this same pattern kept continuing, I'd leave the sport sooner or later. And that's when he stepped up to the occasion. We talk about life-changing moments. That moment for me was when my dad took one of those daily trips back and forth from training, and it became somewhat of an epiphany. He'd use examples of Rafa and Serena and their undivided focus to reaching their goals and the sacrifices they paid on the way. The way they'd give their 110% days after winning a Grand Slam title. The way they'd go chasing after their dreams despite their stupendous success, despite the hardships they face on their way. That one extra push-up is what differentiated these athletes from the ordinary ones. The way Roger Federer transformed from one of the most unpleasant and argumentative athletes into one of the most calm and respected athletes in the sporting world. He'd use all these examples to catch my attention and drive his point home. Suddenly, overcoming the predicament I was in became something not to fear, but to relish. Now, I don't think I was ever that bad, but luckily now my racket always stays firmly gripped in my hand. While my dad was the one who exposed me to these role models and so many more, he taught me 3 key aspects to developing that strong emotional core: humility, the hunger to excel, and showing the right attitude on court. Lesson 3, transcending the gender binary. You see, I'm not here to talk about feminism and its varied set of connotations. I'm here to tell you about how my parents avoided one of society's most prevalent traps: stereotyping how kids are raised. I grew up in 2 contrasting environments. At home, I was taught to be fearless and do the impossible. As a young girl, I never liked Barbie dolls. Neither did my parents ever force me to like them because girls liked them. Rather, I loved watching boy TV shows like Power Rangers and masculine activities like carpentry and sports. Step outside the comfort of my home, and I'm told to act the opposite. I got explicit and implicit messages as to how a girl is supposed to behave and how a boy is supposed to behave. On that note, I want you all to do a little activity with me. I want you to think of a woman named Heidi Roizen. Now, Heidi is a successful Silicon Valley venture capitalist and studied at Stanford University. She also started her own flourishing software company by leveraging her networking skills and her outgoing personality. What personality traits do you think Heidi exhibits? Now, I want you to think of a man named Howard Roizen. Howard is a successful Silicon Valley venture capitalist and studied at Stanford University. He also started his own flourishing software company by leveraging his networking skills and his outgoing personality. What personality traits do you think Howard embodies? Now, what I just asked you to do was the basis of an experiment conducted by a professor at the Columbia Business School. He took his highly qualified MBA class and divided it into two. He gave the first group, both of the groups were given the same case study, but with one small difference. The first group was given the same unchanged case study of Heidi Roizen, while the second group, their case study's name was changed to Howard. Now, what do you think the results were? The results were absolutely mind-boggling. While Heidi and Howard were considered to be equally competent, Howard seemed like the more likable guy, the kind of guy you wanted to work with. While poor Heidi, she looked like she was out for herself and nobody really trusted her. It's funny because that highly qualified MBA class had both men and women. Gender bias isn't just restricted to women. It's all around us and it affects everyone. My parents, on the contrary, exposed me to anything and everything, from Indian classical dance and piano to football and carpentry. I was given a wide spectrum of opportunities to choose from, protected from this mainstream gender biases in society. You know, Khalil Gibran said that parents are like bows and children are like arrows. The more the bow bends and stretches, the farther the arrow flies. I fly not because I'm special, but because they stretch for me. So now, as you walk out of this room today, I want you to think of one thing that your parents did for you that made you fly. Because I know that if it weren't for my parents, I wouldn't be standing here today. Thank you.